In these sessions, we're going to talk about how to create an accessible Word document. Creating an accessible document is easy. To start with, just take note of a few points here when you're writing a document. First, the document structure and the style that you apply to it. Do you have alternative text? What did you do with your table? And how did you write your hyperlink? And what about the color contrast in the document? Is color used for meaning? Let's look further into each point and see what each mean. First, document structure and style. It is very important that your document structure is communicated clearly to the readers so that they can get a really quick overview of what information is on the page. Most people will get that through the visual structure of the document. However, people with visual impairments, for example, won't be able to do that. So we need to mark up the document with appropriate styling like headings, bullets and number features, etc. If the headings is marked up correctly, for example, people with screen reader can also navigate by the headings markup information in the document and also get a quick overview of the information on the page. The same happens with the bullet and number features. Use them to make lists. The screen reader user will be able to expose the number of items in the list and be able to jump from list to list in the content if you do so. Let's look at an example. So this document's personal fact sheet looks like it has been structured properly. It has a title, headings, and subheadings, and lists, etc. However, if you check properly, you can see that it wasn't marked up with the correct markup language. It just visually styled to look like, for example, heading. So this is styled with bold, bigger fonts and color to look like a heading. So this kind of visual structure information is not useful for people with visual impairments, for example. What we need to do is to style the document with the appropriate markup style. So this is a title. So in here, you can see it's just a normal text. So to style it, we go to Home and then go to here. And if you cannot see title, go to More and find title. So now this is styled properly with the title markup style. And for heading 1, we choose heading 1. And this is supposed to be heading 2, for example. And this also a heading 2. So that's how we should style our documents. It's important to note that we do not skip heading level. For example, from heading 2, jump to heading 4, for example, properly based on the styling for those headings, but that will mess up the structure information communicated to screen reader. So try not to skip the heading level. If you don't like the styling, what you can do is actually go to the heading and then style it yourself. So for example, in here, I want it to go a bit bigger, and I want it to be bold, and I want it in orange color. And then you can match this style to your heading. So go to heading 2, change and update the heading 2 to match the selections. So now this heading 2 will be styled this way, and you can actually select heading 2 and it would look the same. So instead of using a different level of heading for the style that you want, change the style to match your selection. The other common issue that we found in documents like this is a heading markup is used inside the text, maybe again for the visual representation of that style. So that will also confuse the screen reader. So what we need to do is change this back to the normal text and use a proper styling for it. For example, italic, change the color to what you want it to be. So that is the proper way of styling inside the document. And another thing we can look at is the bullet point. So this looks like a bullet point. However, again, the screen reader will not be able to communicate these informations to their users. So, and they could not jump from one bullet point to the other as well. So the screen reader will just read dash, etc., and then dash, etc., which is not very useful. So what we can do is actually use the bullet point styling here to change the style properly. So that's how we use appropriate style to structure the document, to convey the document structure information to people with visual impairments, for example, who need to use screen reader. Now look at the next point, alternative text. We should put alternative text on images, charts, shapes, and smart art graphic, etc. This is to help to improve comprehension for all the students, and it's actually a requirement for students with visual impairments because they cannot see the image. They need to know what the image is and what it represents. Let's look at an example. So here we have an image. So how do we put the alt text information in there? So what you need to do is to select the image and right click, go to Format Picture, and under Layout and Property, click on Alt Text and put in a title. So I put in a title and its descriptions. Of course, description here is not very appropriate. This is only for demo purposes. There are various informations about how to write a descriptive and clear descriptions in alt text online, and also in our accessibility website in our university. Please refer to them to see how to do that. So let's say we have more than one images. So we have one image and we have another graph. So we also need to put in alt text in the graph. So let's say you have another graph in your documents. You can see that the Format Picture screen is still open here, but it's under the Spinnacle Tower descriptions. So if you click on the graph, it actually is going to be renewed into an alt text for this graph, while the Spinnacle Tower alt text is saved for that image. So repeat the same steps, put down the title of this graph, and also the description. Go through all the images, graph in this document in the same way to save some time. Then you save the document and this information would be saved. That's how to add alt text to images or graph, etc. Now look at the next thing. Table. Table can be a great way to organize complex information, but remember, don't use them for visual layout. Use them for data purposes only. And in order for students to best navigate a table, particularly if they are using a screen reader, it's very important that it has appropriate headers. And you can also input alt text in tables. Let's look at example of how to do that. So this is a table. There are a few ways to ensure your table accessible. First, try to navigate through the table using the Tab key. If you can do smoothly through the table, cell by cell, row by row, left to right, top to bottom, then a screen reader should have no problem with it. Next, we need to use a heading row for your table. A heading row makes it easier for a screen reader to navigate through your table, and some screen readers will actually call out the names of a row or columns before reading the data, which would help in understanding of this table for the users. So to do that, select a table row, right-click and select Table Property, and then select Row, and deselect Allow row to break across pages, but select Repeat as header row at the top of each page. Table should also include all text. So go to all text, put in a title and also a description for this table and click OK. And that's how you make your table accessible. So now let's continue to the next point. Hyperlinks. Hyperlinks should be descriptive and clear. The user should be able to determine the purpose of links either from the link text itself or the link context. So for example, click me is not recommended to use because just saying click me, it did not tell the reader the purpose of the link. So let's look at an example of how to do that. So for example, this link is going to the Portsmouth FC website. However, the screen reader would read https://www, etc., which is not really useful. So what we can do is we go to the link and then we right click again and then go to Edit Hyperlink, and in here, text to display, just say Portsmouth FC website, for example, and click OK. And now the purpose of this link and the context of this link is clear to the screen reader and to everyone who is reading this document. So let's continue with the next point. Color contrast. Text should have contrast greater than 4.5 to 1 between foreground and background color. Large text and graphical elements should have contrast greater than 3 to 1. So in this example, a black text to a white background, a black text to a green background, and a black text to an orange background, they all meet the requirement. However, not the rest. So this is a reference of what you can do to try to make your color contrast accessible and readable. A text with poor contrast can be difficult for anyone to read, but it will be impossible to read for people with certain visual impairment, or for some people that might be unable to distinguish certain color combinations. Besides color contrast, we also need to be careful that color is not used for meanings. Let's look at an example. For example, in here, founded in 1898 is highlighted in red color to show that this is important and need to draw attention to this fact. However, highlighted emphasis is not going to be visible to visual impaired students with screen reader. So instead of doing that, what we can do is to select the text and go to Style and select Emphasis. And then if you don't like the color, you can always change it to red if you want to, but then that information is captured under emphasis. Update the emphasis to match selections. And then the screen reader will be able to communicate that information to students. Lastly, I would like to bring your attention to a very useful tool in Microsoft Word, when you want to create accessible documents, the Accessibility Checker in Word. Accessibility Checker in Word is a built-in tool in Word to check and detect some common accessibility issue. It is a good starting point when you want to create a new accessible document. It can also help to detect some accessibility issues you might have missed after you created the document. Once detected, it will give you instructions on how to fix them. However, it's important to note that it didn't fix the issue, it only detects it and tells you how to fix them. Also, we need to be aware that no automatic tools can catch all issues. Manual check may still be needed for some items. For example, if your headings are text made big and bold, not real headings, the accessibility checker won't see the problem. So you will still have to check the heading yourself. The same is with the alt text. The accessibility checker won't be able to tell if the alt text in an image is badly written, for example. Now let's have a look of where and how to use this accessibility checker. So first of all, let's open a Word document. So in the Word document, go to File and then select Info, and under Info, go to Check for Issues. And in here, select Check Accessibility. So now you can see that this is a panel listing all the errors that it found in the accessibility checker. So for example, picture 2 is missing alt text, picture 1 and picture 3, they're all missing alt text as well as the table. And at the bottom here, it tells you why you need to fix it and how to fix it. For example, is to add alternative text to the table, right-click the table, click the table properties, etc. So this is how you can use the accessibility checker to help you to create an accessible document. So in these sessions, we have gone through a checklist of a few things we need to do to create accessible Word documents. Keep this checklist in mind, as the same principle also apply to other types of documents like PDF, PowerPoint, even online documents like Google Doc, etc. In addition, we have also gone through how to use accessibility checker in Word to help you detect and fix accessibility issues. There is so much more about accessibility and what we can do to create fully accessible documents. For more information, please visit our accessibility guideline in the e-learning tool website following this address. Thank you.